thought, when you're young, you think law has to do with justice, and then you quickly find out that not so much. And I migrated to innovation and promoting social change, and now here at Quintesa with my partner Carolina and other three partners, we're a team of about 40 people. I don't know, Carol, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit further. If not, I'll get started.
No, you can go on.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here, and Fernando for the invitation. If you want to say hello in the chat, say where you're from, what type of organization, it'll also help us dose the type of information that we focus on so that it can make sense for everybody. So yeah, feel free to say hi there. We're bringing a case of a program that we created and implemented about 4 years ago. And at the time, we didn't know that we were applying systems thinking. It was very important to come across more technical information on systems thinking, to name some things we were doing and identify things that we weren't doing yet to adjust how we work with systems thinking from now on. So first, I'll briefly introduce Quintesa, what we do, and also how in these 15 years of work in Brazil, we've evolved in the understanding of the role that we play in the social and environmental changes we want to promote. Then Carol, who was the person responsible for the implementation of the Impulsionar program, will present more of how it was applied in practice and how in reality it played out. We want to have a very frank conversation and tell you the things that went wrong, the things that we learned from, the things that we did right, the challenges we're still facing. So hopefully we'll open up a little more than 15 minutes in the end so we can hear out everybody here. And at the end, I'll share how, based on Impulsionar and based on the approximation I've been having with system dynamics, specifically System Dynamics Society and Professor Forrester and Professor Sturman's work, how we've been refining the way that we design and implement our interventions. So that's the plan. Quintesa is an ecosystem of solutions for the most crucial social and environmental challenges that we have in Brazil. Our main focus is economic development, education, and climate. Carolina today is responsible for our climate front. I was telling Fernando that these past few weeks we've been officializing a restructuring of the organization, keeping up to date with the challenges and what our role should be. So we've been having more of a focus in these themes, but before that we were agnostic. And a little bit of our history. Quintesa was founded in 2009. We were born as an institute. There was an entrepreneur in finance who sold his bank to Credit Suisse and retired. And his way of giving back was starting Quintesa. And Quintesa's intention at the time was to provide support to social entrepreneurs, helping them strengthen their models and have their solutions reach more people, specifically social entrepreneurs in impact startups. So for a long time, for about 7 years, we worked exclusively in strengthening impact startups. We had a support methodology that wasn't the traditional Y Combinator accelerator model that had a volume approach, right? So spray and pray, as they say. We went in the other direction where we worked with a small amount of startups and entrepreneurs and provided very in-depth support because we really wanted that a couple years after Brazil would have these cases of innovation that reached a certain amount of scale that could contribute to the efforts in solving social and environmental problems. So we really wanted to strengthen the role that innovation played along with governments and NGOs and all of the other players that have a role in solving these problems. Then after a few years was our first big change. I think now when I look back, I understand that we might have been starting to think systemically, and we didn't have that name, but we took a step back. It was about 7 years after we were founded. About 8 or 9 of the impact startups that we had supported had reached relevant sizes, had reached certain liquidity events, and the impacts that they were generating was relevant and at a large scale. And we said, okay, great, this seems like it's working, but let's put aside wishful thinking for a second and understand honestly if what we're doing is contributing in a relevant way to the challenges. Because at that time, we were realizing that there might be a startup, a climate startup, and then a big petrol company. If they decided to go in one direction, or if a public policy decided to go in one direction, that startup being successful wouldn't really matter in a structural sense. So that's when we did our first big change, where we started working with other players in the ecosystem, specifically corporations and other types of funders, so development capital and foundations. And we would connect these types of players with impact startups to either implement the startup solutions in territories, to either um, help them scale, and or either help them introduce their solutions in corporations. So that was our first step into articulating work with different types of stakeholders. So these are some of our big numbers before we started working in programs like Impulsionar. I think our biggest rate that we look at is the survival rate of the entrepreneurs we support. And also the volume in these numbers, they were an important foundation to later on and today work systemically, which is articulating multiple players and finding certain problems that traditionally players are very fragmented in their approach, and being able to bring certain solutions together that usually work separately. I'll skip this part. This is a little bit about work in education, technology, and government. They were some of the baby steps that were being taken before Impulsionar. So we worked with the government of São Paulo with different types of solutions. Then this program below, BRF is a very large food and beverage company here in Brazil. We started working with startups, and then we realized we needed local leaderships and NGOs. We were starting to realize we needed to coordinate multiple actors together. So looking back now, it feels like these were the steps that we're taking in the direction of Impulsionar to finally consolidate what our approach of our work is today. So we diagnose what the hurdles are for certain social environmental challenges. We create the intervention strategy, orchestrate the stakeholders, strengthen the stakeholders either through technical assistance or supporting an implementation, and measure impact with evidence. And some of our funders, they either want, two pieces of this. Impulsionar was all of this, or maybe other funders want one part of this. So we kind of work in modules and creating and implementing programs that revolve around these activities. So that's about Quintessa. We'll jump into Impulsionar now. And I think we were presenting the program at INSPER, which is a university here, with Vinicius Picasso Rodrigues as one of the points of contact in Brazil for system dynamics. Fernando was kind enough to introduce me to him, and he's been very generous in providing us with technical support and in terms of system dynamics methodology. And we thought at that presentation it was helpful to understand how the program was created. So Lemon Foundation is one of the main education foundations here in Brazil. Imaginable Futures is an American education foundation, also very large. They had already created a pedagogical thesis, understanding what was the gap and the leverage that they wanted to work with in Brazil. And this thesis provided part of the pedagogical foundation for the program. And based on this, they launched a bid, a call for applications for implementing partners like Quintessa to implement EdTechs, education startups in certain municipalities to address the problem that they had identified in their thesis. But so we were selected for the program, and right at the beginning, we had it was a very interesting and frank conversation with Lemon as one of the forefront thinkers of education in Brazil, saying listen, we know the types of effects that implementing an EdTech at a municipality will have, and the results will be good. The results will be XYZ. But if you're looking for structural change, the EdTechs are only a part of it. And that's when we started provoking them. And this was a risk capital that Lemon was putting into the program. This is important, and I'll circle back to this towards the end in the learnings. And we kind of asked for their blessing to revisit what the program should be, because an EdTech creates interesting results. But if we wanted structural transformation, we realized that contextually we would need an updated pedagogical model centered on the students. We would need secretariats, education secretariats for the cities at a government level absorbing this pedagogical model. We would need educators at a grassroots level absorbing and knowing how to implement the model, technology to reduce certain specific barriers that we have in Brazil geographically and socially. We would need legal support so that the municipalities would know how to acquire EdTech solutions instead of just donating them the solution, and a year, 2 years from now, they wouldn't know how to maintain it there. And vice versa. We needed to support entrepreneurs because selling to government in Brazil is very, very risky and complicated financially. So supporting them and how to sell to the government, and evidence to support replication and sale. So I'm saying this because we started, this isn't a CLD model, but this could have been, because we started realizing the variables and that were interdependent and important that would keep the results that we wanted from happening, because we had already started thinking of a solution. Let's implement EdTech. So we revisited it, and based on these questions, we asked for their blessing. You have a risk capital. Will you allow us to reinvestigate this and see what architecture of a program we come up with after 7 months? So what was supposed to be a program implementing EdTechs in certain municipalities became a much larger multi-sector and multi-stakeholder program, which Carol will present in more details the different roles that each stakeholder played. So now we'll stitch over specifically to the program aesthetics as well for the second part here of the presentation. I'll pass it over to Carol, and if anyone has any questions during, as I know the questions will be at the end, but if you have any question that you can't hold in, also feel free to interrupt. It's very informal conversation. But Carol can tell us more about how the program actually happened.
Okay, thank you, Eloisa. So I'll present more about Impulsionar, which is our case. We are really grateful of our funders. As Eloisa mentioned, we had Lemon Foundation and Imaginable Futures, and also IDB Lab entering this program. So we had these three funders, and Imaginable Futures was one of the funders that also pushed us to think more about system mapping and learning and community of practice. So it was one of the funders that also pushed us through this direction. As Diana asked, the role here of Quintessa is as a program coordinator. So we coordinated all of the actors and all about this program. I'll explain more later. And also we have an education specialist, which is Reúna. It's a major organization here in Brazil, and that is really focused on public education. So yeah, this is like the foundation of the program, and I'll explain it more about how we gather other actors, because in the end, we were more than 20 organizations involved in this program. So, Elo, do you want to switch to me so I can change? Okay, so you can go on. So
Whatever
Impulsionar is
you
what we
prefer.
say. Yeah, so you can go on and then I switch. So it's the program to leave no student behind, because we work with reducing learning gaps in public schools, specifically on middle school. So Diana, we work with this stage during public education. You can go on a little too, I guess. One more, please. Okay, so we start the program with a pedagogical model. As I mentioned, Reúna created this robust, innovative, super systemic pedagogical model focused on reducing the learning loss. And we have these eight axes. So we absolutely worked with these networks of middle schools, looking to planning, to daily journey of the students, to development of the teachers and training, evaluation, how we monitor this pedagogical learning, how do we use didactic resources as edX, and how do we manage all this system and communicate with teachers, with the students, with their families. And also we had a look on racial equity and mental health at school. There are two really important themes here in Brazil. And go to the next one, please. So yeah, in reality, what happened? We had a program with student-centered learning. So we changed all the system, the managing system of the school and the teachers to monitor the students through assessments and adjusting the curriculum, the methods, the materials according to that. Also, we worked with the whole network. So we just didn't work with one specific school that becomes a case and the system it's not working well. We work with all the public schools of the specific cities that we selected. I'll explain more of that later. And we also use EdTech as a lever for teachers and students, and that reinforces this student-centered learning. And also, we cared about the public procurement processes. So we tested the ethics with the legal structure that facilitated after that city could open a public procurement to hire this EdTech with their own budget. So this was interesting because here in Brazil, sometimes the EdTechs test their solutions in public schools, but with private capital and not concerning these public procurement processes. And then after, the EdTech simply can't go on with the implementation in that school or in that network. So this is really not efficient. So we use this legal framework that Brazil launched some years ago to test this kind of new implementation. Next one, please, Alon. So we had a lot of partners. So Quintessa is just one of it that coordinates the program. As I mentioned, we have Reuna as our pedagogical partner. We had a partner also to learn, assess, and bring evidence to the program. We had this public procurement innovation partners. And for each edition of the program or for each city of the program, we have specific implementation organizations and EdTechs. I'll explain more about this later, but this is the whole ecosystem that we manage and coordinated in this program. So as I mentioned, the pilot that we did, you can go to the next one. It was implementing this program in Portuguese and math, the students from middle school and at the city level. So with municipal education networks here in Brazil. Next one, please. So how was how the program happened? So as Eloisa mentioned, we listened to the beneficiaries and stakeholders. We designed the program, Reuna built the pedagogical model, and then we started to select the organizations and EdTech that will be implemented. We implemented the program. We made this public procurement arrangement, as I mentioned. We used the EdTechs, and in the end, we figured out that we needed 6 more months. So this is one of the learnings that it was really important to have a flexible deadline and also a contingency budget, because the kind of in-depth transformation that we want to do in these schools networks is really profound. And we plan to do this in 1 year, and we ended up learning that we needed 6 more months to finish the implementation of the program and make sure that when we finish the program, they still operate in this model. They still operate concerning the learnings and the way of working with the students that the program proposed. So this was one of the learnings. And also we had some hypotheses in the beginning, and 75 almost percent were validated, which was really good. And we have hypotheses concerning the increase in the students' learning, the transformation and permanency of these pedagogical and management practices in the public schools, the leverage of public procurement, as I mentioned, and the integration of these EdTechs, which was really hard concerning public schools in Brazil. They don't have internet, they don't have data centers. The digital literacy is really low, so it was really one of the challenges that we supported, but we were happy that we were able to validate these hypotheses. So as I mentioned, the program lasted 1.5 years. These 7 cities in Brazil, it were 35 schools, and many teachers and students were involved. And it was really interesting, the variety that we had in these cities. So we chose these 5 cities in the northeast of Brazil, concerning that we had a racial equity focus, but also we wanted to choose networks that were bigger in the south of Brazil. So it was interesting also testing the pilot of this program in different scenarios and contexts, and we had different learnings with all of them. Go on, hello, please. So yeah, in the end, as I mentioned, we had specific implementing organizations, which were these 3. And also in each of these cities, we implemented one EdTech that could be an EdTech on gamified learning, on assessment, and also on data management for the public school. So we had a really positive impact in increased learning, mainly on math. And the hypothesis is that the learning gaps in math were really deep. And when we look to them, we have a bigger increase in learning than Portuguese, because if you don't know how to sum in math, after you cannot do more complex, how to say, activities. So we looked at in math, we had this really great result. And you can go on a little. And also we had really with Germina, which is our partner, also looked in relative terms. This will be if Brazil reached 90% of their with our education goals. And right now we are so far about reaching these goals. So it was really interesting to see how this could leverage the public sector in Brazil to achieve their goals. And we did that in half of the time that it was proposed by our education ministry. So it was really great. Go on. And also we made this transformation process, as I mentioned, with 83 of the educators using the materials that we provided, using data for our assessments, and improving their teaching practices. We expanded the program like organically. The schools of network looked into other years. So they expanded beyond middle school. They expanded beyond Portuguese and math and applied this approach to other curricular components. And also sometimes in one network, we applied the program in 80% of the schools, and they ended up expanding to 100% of the schools. And also they had this intention on continuity. So the intention to continue using these practices, we provided them with the program. And go on. As I mentioned, we leveraged the public procurement for innovation, and we used for the first time this Brazil's new legal framework. And it was with small cities, so it was really inspiring to other cities to use this new legal framework. And also we, over 30 public managers were, how to say, inspired how to use these new models of open innovation in the government, which is a thing that we don't see much here in Brazil. Go on. And at least we had this integration of EdTech in public schools. It didn't work in all of the networks, but in some of that, it really worked. And we had students actively using these gamified platforms, and also learning new ways to have this student-centered approach. And in this city specifically, this EdTech is still being implemented there. So the program ended, it's been 1 year, 1.5 years. So it's really good to see that nowadays the students still have this gamified learning with the public budget of that city. Please. And as I mentioned, we use EdTech for gamified learning and also for data management. So in one of the cities, we also had the teachers and managers using this platform and data being managed digitally. Previously it was on paper, which is really not efficient. So we brought more efficiency to this network. You can go on, I'm finishing. And beyond implementing the program, we also strengthened this whole ecosystem and B2G startups. So we did an acceleration process with the implementing organizations and with the EdTechs on financial management, on go-to-market strategy, on how their operation could be well structured. So not looking just to the program, we also fostered these organizations to exist and expand here in Brazil. And many of the EdTechs that we supported and accelerated now are selling their products to other cities, through other governments. Yeah, thank you for explaining the B2D model, Elo. So yeah, we had results in many areas. So increasing student learning, the transformation of these practices in these education networks. We had this leverage of innovation public procurement. We use these EdTechs in public education, and at last, as I mentioned, we strengthened this ecosystem of education and B2G startups. So yeah, now the final lessons learned and challenges. So one of the things was to choose the right partners. So we as a coordination organization, it's not possible for us to be an expert on all of these areas. So we had to choose the right public procurement partner, the right pedagogical partner, the right EdTechs, the right implementing organizations, because we coordinate all of them and we have to trust that they are doing their what is supposed for them to do. And it was really a struggle to manage all these organizations interested and egos to a specific goal of the program. So this program is an interesting fact is that we didn't create any new organization, but we worked with these 20 organizations looking to the same goal. And it was the hardest thing I managed in my life, because we had, as I mentioned, different kinds of different ways of working and thinking about how this program should be implemented. So it was really interesting having this collective action and bringing everyone together. And as I mentioned, it was really important to have a contingency budget. So for example, in one of the public schools, we didn't have sufficient computers. So with that, we cannot implement the EdTech. So we hired a partner that acquired these computers, and then we could implement the EdTech. And also the flexible deadline. So if all of we wanted, we didn't make in 1 year because of the rhythm of each city network. So we had to look onto this as well. And as I mentioned, we had better results in math. And this had us thinking about how to expand and how to design further implementations and additions of the program that Eloise is going to talk with us a little bit more. So I'll pass it to you, Carol.
Thank you, Carol. So on the on the side of systems thinking, like I said in the beginning, this was a program that it was designed very organically, very boosted by Quinteso's culture and always trying to revise what we're doing so that the impact is larger. So it started as something we thought was going to be just the implementation of EdTechs in municipalities, and it grew into this multi-stakeholder program with over 20 actors of more than 5 types of natures and cultures and incentives and goals. So after the program finished, um, and the results were so good, specifically the 90% of the national goals reached in half the time, we looked back and wanted to understand why that it worked so well. And I don't remember how or when, but the word systems came, and that's what we started calling it. But I really felt the need for us to back this by more technical knowledge. And I started reading different lines of theory on systems dynamics and systems thinking and systems change. So MIT and SPAL and the IAC in Berlin. Um, and so on that level, here are some of the lessons learned, and then we'll move on to the third part on what we've incorporated in our methodology now. But I think the first one is this first bullet, which is the biggest challenge that we have now in trying to sell this program or similar or programs that follow this methodology in other areas. So we've designed similar programs in health, and one sort of similar in climate. And I think that the biggest aversion that funders have is that those 7 months that Lemon Foundation authorized us to update our understanding of the problem, translating it to the system dynamics language, update our understanding of the system that changes all the time. It's too unforeseeable. So it's very hard for us when they say, okay, how long will it take? How much will it be? Who will be the 20 actors? What will be the municipalities? What results specifically will come in? And all of that is part of the program design once we update what our understanding is of the problem and who needs to be involved. So this kind of prep phase, diagnosis phase that we call here, there's a strong aversion to it. And I think it's my my opinion is that it's due to the short-term thinking mental model. I think most of the funders uh, have, and it's not only a mental model, I think very objective incentives are guided towards results that are in the same year or in 2 years or in 3 years. 3 years is considered a long-term program here already. And it's not at all long enough when we're talking about education or we're I'll get to our program that we're launching that will be focused specifically on math, but let's say the role that math plays in a country's productivity rates and their economy. It's extremely important, but that's 10 years, 15 years. So this immediacy and the short-term results motivation is the for sure the biggest challenge we have in partnering with funders to promote programs like this. The second one, the it wasn't cost efficient. So there's I think in most types of problems in countries, you have the traditional um, dollar per student, or in health, you have dollar per patient, or in jobs, you have dollar per job generated. And this was a very expensive program. I think this wasn't in full a technological innovation, but it was an innovation. And like all innovations, it starts more expensive, and then you start finding out how to make it cheaper and what were the main things that work, which is what we're doing for the next edition. But it was very expensive, so we weren't able to. We did about 6 months fundraising for stage 2, and we weren't able to fundraise for it, even though the results were very good. It just simply was too expensive, and it was also it was difficult in terms of cost for us as well, and that's tied into the third bullet because It was a program that started out with EdTechs at the core, and the EdTechs were very important for reducing certain barriers. But what actually reduced the gap, what made the biggest change and impact wasn't the EdTechs. They were more in a supporting role. It were it was the new pedagogical model and the quality of the implementation. So it was a very expensive program, and you have all of these players with their own costs, and these are factors that are just realistic in terms of having people work together and things being cost efficient for you. So this is also something that we're working on. It's something we realize that only makes sense for us at scale, which is what we're also going to try to do for the next edition. So we're making it smaller, more enxuto. How do I say? More focusing on the more efficient. Yeah, we're taking of the results, let's say the 60-70% responsible for the reasons of the good results is what we're focusing on and applying it at a larger scale. And yeah, so and third, the conflicts of interest. I think in theory, a lot of system thinkers and systems change and philanthropy are very agreeable in terms of having the problem at the center and not the organization or the solution. But in reality, it's still a big challenge because each organization has their own agenda, and especially if the funders are backed by a company, for example. So when you're managing a multi-stakeholder program, the challenges you come across in terms of conflicting agendas and interests are infinite and very difficult to manage, like Carol said. And finally, a lesson learned was we did several things, especially when we, those 7 months studying, and we said, okay, what we want to do is implement EdTech to generate these results. What could be the impediments along the way? And then we realized pedagogical model, implementing with the government, implementing with the teachers at a grassroots level, having legal support so they know how to do public procurement, all of that. Then we'll get the results we want. This was a mapping of the system and kind of a initial CLD. But after we learned about CLD, this is what we want to integrate more formally to our future programs, mapping out these interdependencies and the weight that each variable has among each other, which with much more rigor that this tool brings. I think this is a summary of the main lessons learned and challenges that we still have. I'm going to move on to the final part of our presentation, but I was reading in the chat a little bit about who's here, and I think there's a lot of there are several researchers and academics and data analysts and a couple other professionals. But a hypothesis that I have here thinking is that us as implementers, we have the curve for us to develop the program architecture is long. And that's the biggest impediment that we have for creating programs like this. So something that just came to mind reading the chat here is some sort of complementary efforts of researchers and data analysts and creating the foundations with the evidence and the players and we've been thinking of this here in Brazil, partnering with these types of players to kind of reduce costs in the architecture development phase. So bringing closer academia and researchers and implementers so that this first discovery phase that's farther away and harder to develop might sometimes already be ready, and we can get funders to feel more comfortable with this type of program and kind of reduce a little bit of the unforeseeable elements. So based on these learnings, we're going to launch 2 new education programs this year. Inova staying, I think STEM is, oh yeah, STEM is in English. So STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And one specifically that's Inova Maths, which is the one on the left. The Inova Maths is the evolution of Impulsionar, where we're shrinking it to what we have understood based on the volumes and volumes of evidence of the program were what made the biggest difference, the most relevant levers. Also, we are internalizing some of the activities and we're going to propose it at larger scale and also propose it to different types of funders. specifically development banks, which the long-term thinking is more aligned with their type of capital. So these are the adaptations we've made based on the lessons learned in the past. So we're launching in June, and I'll go to the last part of the program. But if anybody wants to chat, exchange knowledge, give tips, give any type of exchange, it's always good. And on to the final part. I'm going to very quickly go over what we've incorporated after Impulsionar, after we started learning a little bit about systems thinking, reading the Donella Meadows book, talking with Fernando, the MIT team, Vinicius Rodrigues here at INSPIR in São Paulo, and we still have a long way to go. So I'm curious to finish up this part and hear what the group has to say. So sorry, it's in Portuguese in the middle, but because it's a photo. But one of the elements we've incorporated is we really try to do an education phase for funders before we propose the project. And this is an image that helps a lot when we say that fixing a clock is complicated. It's hard, but there will be someone who will absolutely know how to finish, start to finish, resolve that problem. A problem with a complex nature is different, right? Like education or poverty or climate change. So I think this is a very important concept from the start that we present to funders to get them in the same mindset and kind of invite them to start thinking differently and understanding, and also the humility that we all have to have and knowing that we don't know how to solve these big problems because they're dynamic systems. So this is a concept that's been very helpful. I'm sure you all know the charge that Professor Sturman uses. This is also a concept that's very helpful when we're talking to implementing partners and funders, also to help invite them to get into this mindset. So, you have a challenge, you thinking that you're solving that challenge. And then at some point, it's very probable that you'll have unlocked unforeseen or undesired effects. So this is also a concept that we've integrated very strongly to invite funders and implementing partners to be a part of this more complicated type of arrangement. We've also integrated some of the concepts from Professor Sturman from the courses that we've watched, and also several ones that we saw in the free courses on SDS. And this is a concept that we've been using a lot, which is after we've kind of invited them to come into the mindset that things are complex, we can't be sure of anything we're doing and we need to change it. Also visualizing how fragmented most efforts are. So this is very true in economic development in Brazil, for example. You have capacity building organizations that don't talk to each other at all, and they absolutely need to, because one of them is doing soft skills, the other one is doing a technical skill, the other one is preparing the candidate for a job application. And if these aren't aligned amongst themselves, and especially if these aren't aligned with what the market actually needs in terms of hiring, it doesn't work. Programs here in Brazil are very ineffective in job development, for example. So this concept of fragmentation has been very important as well. So these are the premises we have for the projects. We'll send this material after. We've kind of mixed up MIT system dynamics, especially for program design, but for premises and kind of inviting people to be in the mental model, we've used a lot of the Oxford concepts, the Skull Center Oxford concepts. And last slide, these are our macro stages. Sorry, it's in Portuguese. I decided to put it in very last minute before the webinar. But basically, it's the first stage of diagnosis, which is like those 7 months of Impulsionar, diving in to the problem, mapping out the system, understanding desires, limitations, to move on to the second stage, which is frame creation, mapping solutions, eventually implementation. And I think the biggest thing that we've integrated here with the support of Vinicius Rodrigues at INSPIR was he very generously is supporting us in putting in the iceberg model of systemic innovation and especially in providing CLDs in the programs we design as an effort to boost trust and reduce the insecurity that funders might feel in partnering up with a program that needs to involve uncertainty and adaptation and question marks that will be answered along the way. So I think this is the most tangible thing that we've integrated, in addition to all of the premises that have been bringing a lot of comfort and excitement. So that's it. I think I'm maybe 3 minutes late on the 45 minutes we had, but I think we'll move on to questions now. I'll pass it over to Fernando.
Yeah, thank you, Luisa and Carol. We do have a lot of questions here in the Q&A, so I'll just take it over and I'll share my screen. So we have 20 questions. Let's try to go over a few of them. Don't forget that you can upvote or downvote questions here so we can answer the most popular ones. Starting by the one on our screen here. And I'm gonna read this out loud because then it gets into the recording. So you talk about improved learning. Can you say a bit more about the linkage between the systems thinking approach of the program and the improved learning of subjects such as math?
So I would say that the systems thinking approach was on the design of the program that considered these eight axes that we mentioned of the pedagogical model, and also working with many actors of different, they're experts on different things, so the procurement part, the EdTech, the implementers, etc., and not specifically on learning math. So it was in the system and how the public network was organized, specifically on math. It was specific on these subjects, or math or Portuguese or other curriculum aspects. It was more on the student-centered learning and not specific on the system approach of these subjects. So I hope I explained it. We could go further on that, but from that moment, and this is the decision of the program at the time, it was to focus on the how the system was organized and not on the learning specifically or on that item.
Thank you, Carol. So people are really interested in the curriculum and how the program is applied. So is it possible to see a glimpse of the curriculum map that you design in your curriculum?
I can send later some Reuna materials, which is our pedagogical partner that they have like open in their website. It's in Portuguese, unfortunately, but you can look more about their methodology on learning math.
Thank you, Carol. So anything that you share with me, I can make it and share with the rest of the attendees here. So feel free to share any material that is valuable for the attendees today. The next question here is, I'm very interested in to hear what research evidence you have to support your pedagogical model. What research methodologies have you been used and where is it being shared?
We can also send these links to you. That is all the evidence that Lemon Foundation had, because they are one of the main foundations in Brazil that works with education, and also Reuna is working with public education in Brazil. It's more than 20 years and really involved in the education ministry here in Brazil. So yeah, I could send you the links with more evidence about that.
Carol, can you explain what does an increase of 5.5 in math mean, and what could the students do that they could not do before?
Yeah, the 5.5 is about the Brazilian public system measurement. Is really specific about Brazil, so I understand it's hard to understand what this means, not for you, but I can send you more materials about our impact measurement approach, and also like the scale of this measurement, how what every number means. But this the fact is that, as I mentioned, in math, we have these deeper challenges, and with our student-centered approach and on learning and our assessing, we have this increase on learning. So considering an iceberg model that if you don't know something, it goes even deeper and deeper, that's how we manage to increase this learning on math.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, and this
Bruno-
5 Carol can send this later, but there are two main scales that we use. The INEP, which is the one where the 90% targets reach, which is the national education targets, and the SAEB, which is a proficiency ruler. I think Carol can say better, but in relative terms, 5.5 is very, very high. So I don't know if you want to comment more on this, Carol. I know we're answering a little fast, so it's for everyone to stay on time. We're just quickly commenting. But yeah, we can send these details later.
Yeah, it's important what you mentioned that in relative terms, we had this 90% of increase in what was expected in this public school system. So this is easier to understand than 5.5 in math, right?
What was your pedagogical model, and how did it differ from that which has in practice prior to your project?
I can send you also our pedagogical model. And I didn't understand what is like, how do you differ from what, which was in practice?
I think
okay. Previously, okay, now I got it. Thank you. So previously, the learning was not focused on the system of the school. It was not focused on each student learning. So we, with our system approach and with the pedagogical model, the teacher and the management system was reinforced to look into each individual student progress concerning the assessments and also using the ethics. And before the program, the system was working in a way that in the regular time, the student had classes, and the student that had some learning loss had extra classes in the evening, for example. So in the morning they had the regular, and in the evening extra classes. So this makes the system is still provoking this learning loss. So what we do is to end with these evening, for example, extra classes, and working on the regular classes. So how with the regular classes that were already happening in that school, how do we ensure that they learn in that period, and not if we have and not having to have this many extra classes and events to cover that learning loss.
Thank you, Carol. So we move on to the next question here. Is there any work developed in conjunction with non-government organizations in Brazil? And do you know the work of Via de Acesso and Projeto Gauss?
Yeah, many of the 20 organizations, as I mentioned, are non-governmental organizations here in Brazil. So the implementing partners, the education implementing partners are NGOs. The EdTechs are not, but we don't know these two projects that we mentioned, so we can talk more about this later. But yeah, we chose this. We didn't have any specific procurement criteria that the organization should be non-governmental or profitable organization.
This is also an interesting element in the program, because I think the default mode is to only work with one type of solution provider. And since we were agnostic in the model, it was helpful. You had to have an interesting solution for the problem, be it startup, academia, measurement, legal, NGO. it's funny, these things, they kind of seem simple now, but it's not. A very clear example is if you look at a lot of funders' rules, they can only fund one type of organization. So yeah, it didn't matter for us that much, the legal entity. That's why it was such a mix of different types of organizations.
Thank you, Eloisa. I'm seeing here that we do still have a few questions to be answered. Would you like to answer any specific one? Maybe you're interested in picking one of those questions here and answering instead of me picking one. Is there any one that you're interested in answering?
Carol, do you want to maybe give a big answer to a lot of them?
Yeah, I'm reading yeah, there's some questions about EdTech here. We can send the material, but as I mentioned, we use EdTech on gamification, on data management, on assessment, and the program funded the tests. And then after the city should hire with their own budget, as I mentioned, this happened. Khan Academy, someone asked, was one of the EdTechs that we evaluated, and it's important to mention that each city chose the EdTech they wanted to implement, and this was really important. It wasn't us forcing them to use some kind of technology, so it were the teachers and the management system of that public education system that chose. So yeah, they unfortunately didn't choose Khan Academy, but it was one of what we evaluated. Let us see if there's something about this system. Yeah, many about learnings and pedagogical aspects that we can answer later. Elo, is there any one of system thinking that you are looking?
Maybe could you go up a little bit, Fernando, and then we can give our closing remarks.
Yeah, sure.
Or a little bit. Yeah. No, there was another one.
This one?
Yeah, systems thinking pedagogy. Yeah. I think it was interesting because the systems thinking was on several levels, right? When you look at the axes that Heuna created for the pedagogical model, it already had a multi-layered approach. And then you zoom out a little bit more, we had our different stakeholders at play. So I think systems thinking can have a lot of can be tangibilized in different ways. For us, I think what was the strongest element in this program was the union of several actors that usually don't work together or might have never worked together from different types of cultures and incentives. So I think pedagogy was at the center of it, but I think articulating different types of hurdles in addition to pedagogy was very important, like the legal aspect. This is something that wouldn't come naturally in developing a program like this, and guaranteeing a lasting effect there where the government official would be able to acquire the technology after. So I think it was in this union of things, in the zoom in layer, the pedagogical model, and the zoom out layer, the other types of problems that are a little bit more invisible. I think maybe but we have a lot of material on the program. It has its own website and a lot of PDFs with evidence. It's mostly in Portuguese, but there's about dozens of AIs that can translate all of those for you very well. And Carolina and I are more than happy to talk to anyone else who might have more questions. Some people already sent me some messages on the private chat, so we're happy to talk more.
So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Eloisa, and thank you, Carol, for such a great talk. I just want to take the very last minute here to remind everyone joining us today that these kind of topics will be discussed at the International System Dynamics in Boston in August. So you can join us there to get to know a little bit more about systems thinking and system dynamics applied to various fields. And thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining. And once again, Eloisa, Carolina, for such a great talk explaining how the program worked and how all the implementation that went through and the involvement of such a broad number of agencies and actors. And I hope to see you guys in the next webinar. And yeah, thank you for joining again.
Tchau, thank you. Obrigada.